Welcome to the Tavora Talks InfoSec podcast and daily news, brought to you by Tavora. Welcome everyone to another episode of Tavora Talks InfoSec podcast. I am your host, Cash, and I'm joined here with my co-host, Matt Mosley. What's up, Matt?
Hola.
And we are joined once again by none other than the cloud security guru himself, Chris Callis. What's up, Chris? Thanks for coming back.
Hey, it's good to be here.
I need a soundboard so I could do like
It's
cool,
good
like.
to be here. Okay.
We should get that. I think that'd be actually
I'm
cool.
down.
Add on. Let's work on it. But what are we talking about today? So Chris came to us. He's like, you know what? Let's talk about this cool topic that's actually hot right now. It's Google, Apple, COVID-19. They're actually trying to team up together to kind of come up with some kind of strategy to help track the whole world, pretty much, something like that. I know Chris will kind of give us some more details on it, but essentially they're trying to build an app so that anybody who has COVID can go in the app and say, hey, I have COVID. And then that'll kind of alert anybody else that came in contact with that person, and then they can go get testing. So with that, I set up, Chris, take it over. Give us some more details of what's going on. It seems like a big security issue, but yeah, what are your thoughts on it? Shed some light.
All I know is that Apple and Google, we can always trust them to have our privacy in our best interest, right?
I think you hit a nail on the head, Matt. You know, the Apple and Google, we could always trust them. I think Apple's definitely taken a stand since like 2014, 2015, you know, when they started enabling encryption by default on, was it after iOS 8 or something like that, you know, and doing the secure enclave work. You know, they've definitely taken the stance like, you know, we don't make money off of collecting your data. So essentially, you know, we want to give you good hardware and make privacy really clear. And I think they are probably, you know, they were the butt of the joke when South Park came out, you know, and they were talking about like the iTunes agreements that you always have to use to click. And they were like 50 pages long and nobody ever read it. So it was a joke. And I was just looking at one of their privacy agreements recently, and the stuff is very, very clear. And they also, you know, Apple, not Google, they usually have like reporting and sharing off by default. And even I get annoying pop-ups, which I love, where it's like, hey, you know, Dark Sky has been, you know, using your location data. Do you want to continue with this? And even if I click always allow, it reminds me again in like a couple of days. So, you know, Apple, I'm a little more trusting of. Google, I'm not, but it was funny because when they were going through that Senate hearing or whatever it was last year, I had a pop-up on Google and it was like asking me all these questions. And it's like, yeah, I trust you guys. You know, they have like their Project Zero group. They create technologies like Jigsaw. In the technologies that they create from their security groups, they don't even use like Google DNS and stuff like that. So I don't trust Google as much as Apple. But I think those two companies could come together and create something. So, you know, this is kind of like the whole cryptography thing, right? You know, there's a public demand to want to get to the bottom of this. Obviously, there was, you know, not proper preparation, that type of stuff with this pandemic. And it looks like, you know, they're doing Apple and Google things and they're really trying to understand this. And I think it's John Callis that helped create this standard. I could be wrong. Let me see here.
Who's John Callis?
He's a guy that gets me into all the cool DEF CON parties.
Oh, so he's related somehow?
I don't think he's related,
Sure.
but he's essentially the father of elliptical curve cryptography, you know? So he's a big, you know, cryptography expert, privacy advocate, you know,
Okay.
ACLU senior fellow, that type of person.
Connections to the NSA probably.
I don't know. But I mean, he's pretty
We
trustworthy.
can speculate.
I mean,
Alleged connections to the
If it
NSA.
wasn't for him, we wouldn't have TLS the way it is today. We'd still be using like block ciphers. You know, it's like encrypt everything on your system, send over an encrypted block, decrypted versus having stream ciphers. So like, you know, there's a lot that this guy's done really well. And if anybody could design a good standard like this, it's probably him, and maybe bring in somebody like myself or a Matthew Blaze, you know, to really, you know, evaluate the software. So what I did when I started reading about this is what we could start off if people haven't, you know, really looked into this. I think Google's presentation on this is probably the easiest to digest because it's like a PowerPoint, right? So for people that aren't familiar with what we're talking about, it's using Bluetooth LE, low energy, to have a privacy focused, safe contact. So your phone is on you all the time, right? And if you're near a user and you guys have been talking for more than 10 minutes or something like that, your phone kind of takes notes. And then, so if Bob or Alice is positively identified or diagnosed with COVID-19, and at least in the current standard, the way they do that is volunteer the information, then the phones exchange anonymous identifier beacons, right? And then a few days later, with Bob's consent, his phone uploads 14 days of keys. So then you could figure out who else Bob has been in contact with, right? So you can use the phone, and it's supposed to be de-anonymized data to track, hey, have I been in proximity of somebody that has COVID-19, right? Is the whole premise of this. And they're saying, there's anonymous identifiers. They use beacons. You
There's the
receive
trolls,
notification
right?
on what do you do next.
False
I mean,
data.
yeah,
There's a lot. Yeah.
Worst case scenario, if this is really jacked, right, we all just report that we have it and just like break the system,
But I read like they have some kind of foolproof. There was like an idea about how to regulate that is the person who wants to report it can't just report it. The physician has to use the same app, generate a code, and then give that code either a QR code or like a string of digits or whatnot. Then with that, they can add to it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, let's take a look at the standard. So when I see stuff like this, I'm like, well, this is like a nice, not a fairy tale promise, right? But the sound and the thought process is solid. But when I think Bluetooth is like low power Bluetooth beacons, I think Cisco Meraki. I remember one of the first times I was like auditing one of their environments, I saw you could use Bluetooth beaconing, and digging into a little bit, with the beaconing. Essentially, it's like, hey, I'm Home Depot, right? And with Home Depot, you're in an aisle that has hammers. Well, hey, these guys are within a proximity of this aisle, and we're going to send them a notification that, this particular hammer's on sale, right? So they know generally, a little more precisely where you're at because it's using the Bluetooth beaconing and you have a shorter range. And they're using that to push information to you. So that's the first thing I thought about, right? So really it comes down to what kind of data is shared and how is my identity protected. So Apple puts up, something a little bit more in depth than Google's blog, which I appreciated. And they have 3 documents, and I can send them over to you guys if you'd like. The first one is contact tracing Bluetooth specs, and this is subject to modification and extension. And then the other one that they have is contact tracing cryptographic specifications. And then the third one they have is essentially the API developer documentation on how you use the API, the type of data that can be from the API. So we'll kind of I just wanted to talk about some stuff that I thought that was interesting. So in terms of data being exchanged and some of the definitions that exist. So we talk about the contact detection service, and that's the Bluetooth low energy service for detecting device proximity. So how phones know that they've been close to one another, right? And then you have a tracing key. And that tracing key is generated once per device. So this is kind of like your master key and like an HSM or something like that. And based on that tracing key, you can derive a daily tracing key. And that key is derived from the tracing key every 24 hours for privacy, they're saying. And then from that daily tracing key, there's a diagnosis key. And that's a subset of the daily tracing key, which are uploaded when the device owner is diagnosed positive for COVID-19. So that tells me right there, that's when the first exchange of potentially personal information comes into play, right? So I want to dig into a little bit more of, hey, if I do click yes, what type of information is provided from the device owner, right? And
right, like, so even though this information is anonymous, right, because all we see is, or all they would see is like device ID, which it probably could be traced back to that person, and whatnot, right? Like you have all this information, but and while it is anonymous, like we know that through metadata, like we can probably identify who these people are, or at least get a good general idea of where they are and what they're doing, right?
Where they
like
are,
Bruce Schneer
what they're
talks
doing.
about this,
Yeah.
like in his book, I think it's called Data and Goliath, right?
Yep.
Where he talks about the metadata that even though it's anonymous, like phone records, right? We don't know who is behind each line. We can come to certain conclusions. Like if a number calls an abortion clinic so many times and then all of a sudden it stops calling that abortion clinic, well, we can come up with 2 scenarios, right? Either the abortion went through or that person decided not to go through with the abortion. But probably if we investigate more, we could even find out more information. But like data is not always completely anonymous, even though it may not have a name associated with it, right?
Yeah, even if
Like,
it's completely anonymous, you're still susceptible. Before people would talk about like a rubber hose attack where you have to beat the private key out of somebody, right? If you had no other means, to
That
actually
sounds like a
crack
good
something.
time.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, something what's better than, as much as everybody likes to beat everybody up, what's better than that? And it's the path of least resistance. And you saw that with Silk Road doing correlation attacks, right? They just put assets on the ground and observed the guy logging into the website at the same time that they saw, their target was logging into a website, and they were able to identify the person just by observing them. My concern with something like this is, maybe not necessarily here in the United States, but other places in the world, because they're going to be all about this. You saw what happened in Israel, right? Where they're like, hey, we're essentially going to proxy everything and monitor text messages to see if people say they do have it and take it from there. This, even though it doesn't know who I am, it knows where I go, it knows where I live, and I could see that to enforce a quarantine or whatever you want, right? At that point. So there's a lot of potentials, like you're saying, to abuse this like anything else. So I want to see how this protects it. So the last definition here is a rolling proximity identifier. So we have a tracing key, daily tracing key, a diagnosis key, and a rolling proximity identifier. And with the rolling proximity identifier, that's a privacy preserving identifier derived from the daily tracing key and is sent via Bluetooth advertisements and changes every 15 minutes to prevent wireless tracking. But it's not just to prevent wireless tracking. I think it's also used to kind of make it easier to consume the data, because if that key only had an interaction with somebody within a 15-minute period, that's going to be a much smaller subset of people that could be potentially exposed to a virus, right? So, but it does talk about being a privacy preserving identifier. And that's the first one here where it talked about privacy preserving, and that really caught my interest. So we'll kind of talk about that in a second, right?
That's Apple's.
This is the standard that Apple, well, I mean, the technology's been around. If you take a look at like Cisco.
Yeah, but this was documented in Apple stuff.
Yeah,
right?
This is the stuff I'll send over to you guys. Actually, let me send it to you right now, because I guess that would help, right?
That's fine. We
I'll
can
put
talk
it,
through it.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
I just wanted to make sure, because it would surprise me to find out. And I'm not trying to take a shot at Google, but they haven't been they don't have a history of really being concerned about privacy. So that was why I was surprised that the word privacy actually was even documented. And now I'm not surprised, because it's actually Apple, not Google.
They're not Facebook,
for sure.
but yeah, they don't have the best track record.
Oh God, I can only imagine what that would look like if Facebook developed this.
Yeah, but Google creates so much good stuff too. So, I mean, they definitely have the expertise to do this if they wanted to do it right? But then it's the outside pressure to being like, hey, we want to do this, then every other nation state wants to do this. And it's, this cascading effect, and human operators are just bad at not looking at things. We saw situations a couple of years ago, and I'm sure it still goes on, where, police are, searching their, arrest systems, without going through the proper warrant. And there's always the outliers that exist, right? It doesn't mean that everybody's bad. They generally are not, but you do have people that will take advantage of it, right? So we move on. The document talks about the contact detection service, which looks a lot like the Bluetooth LE spec, except it has an additional 16-bit UID that exists to make. Okay, so let's see here. The advertising payload, it talks about that. I'm seeing if I highlighted anything else. Scanning behavior. I thought this was interesting. So the scanning behavior on the standard. So discovered contact detection service advertisements shall be kept on the device. Right. So any type of contact detection that you have will be kept on the device, they're saying. So I thought that was key, right? Scan results will be timestamped and the RSSI captured per advertisement. And they're probably doing that to figure out how close were we, not just, hey, were we within 10 minutes? Were we together for 10 minutes? But the signal strength tells me that they want to know how close was this guy? Was this guy in the same subway car, or were they standing right next to each other, right? The scanning interval in the window shall have sufficient coverage to discover nearby contact detection service advertisers within 5 minutes. And the scanning strategy that works best is opportunistic. So leveraging existing wakes in scan windows and within minimum. Okay, so that doesn't really matter. I mean,
so in a super worst case scenario, 1984 version of the future, they could determine if say Cash was 6 feet away from me based on the signal strength, and then issue a fine automatically.
Yeah, totally.
How cool is that?
Or if you're like in China, where you have to have a license to live somewhere, right? It's like, hey, do they have a license to live in this precinct or something like that, right?
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, going down that route. I mean, this
has a lot of benefits for good. I can see, right? Also, a lot of benefits for bad. Like a lot of benefits for bad. All it would take would be to put sensors up on like light poles throughout the city.
Oh yeah. You know,
and
I
now
was
you
actu-
could figure out where people.
They're already there. I mean, in New
Yeah.
York, there was a case where, the toll road sensors, they were sticking those throughout the city to detect where you were going. Even though you weren't being charged for a toll, they know you had it in the
Just to
car.
track
So
you.
they just wanted to do it just to track you.
Well, you
Right.
know, I was reading, they were saying like, okay, the best place to put these kind of sensors are like entrance of, these medical healthcare places or grocery stores. And grocery stores can track who's coming in, who's not, ping out their users. And then aside from that, what are they going to do with that data in the long run? Right. So,
Assuming they let you go into the store, right? You can
yeah,
no longer
exactly.
come here, not because you have some virus, but because, you're flagged as an individual user. We're talking because Matt was talking about worst case
And there's
scenario.
another fine because you've let too many people in your store.
Yeah.
But go on.
So it talks about
Cash,
privacy.
what were you saying?
Oh, sorry, Cash. Yeah.
No, I mean, that was it. I was just saying like, I mean, there's a lot that can go into using this Bluetooth technology to kind of do shady things pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
and we already know that stuff like this exists today, right? Because
yeah,
from
does.
our side of things, we do audits on different retail organizations and whatnot. And we know that through advertising, they actually do track Wi-Fi connections within their store. They track, even if your phone it doesn't connect to their Wi-Fi, it still sends out a beacon and you can get those packets and you can figure out who that person is and you can determine how many times they come into your store. And all that stuff gets fed up into, some sort of analytic channel, I'm sure. And dissected and figured out how do we market better to these people. I don't know, but
all while
I'm
being
sure
transmitted in an unencrypted way and stored in an
Right.
unencrypted way, and like data is not being handled. But don't worry. But yeah, so
so that stuff's already existing, and I can just imagine someone with nefarious means and ideas using what Google and Apple are putting together here for other purposes. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and take my tinfoil hat off, and we'll just listen to the rest.
yeah, I mean, that's why we have the Fourth Amendment, right? Because our founding fathers, they knew that like an overreaching government is probably one of the most dangerous things that exist, right? So at the end of this document here, the one of three, so we talked about, hey, the type of, at least the ways that it handles the data, the way that it should be protecting it. So privacy concerns. So they're talking about how maintaining user privacy is an essential requirement for design. And, Apple's kind of putting their stuff on the line at this moment because people do, I think, inherently trust Apple, maybe not Google, and that trust is huge with them, right? Because we're paying a lot of money for their devices, for their services. And if you violate that trust, I mean, there's not a lot of other options other than Apple and Google, but there
I
could be
will say
repercussions.
Apple has gone out of their way in the last few years to kind of make a
Yeah.
name for themselves in privacy and also their user security.
Yeah, I mean, they hired the guy that created the Signal protocol for iMessage team years ago. They have the right guy working on this stuff. So some of the stuff they call out.
They refused to decrypt that San Bernardino terrorists' iPhone.
Yep. Yeah, and I think they still got the data, but still, yeah. I mean, there'll always be ways to break things, right? And I mean, encryption is one of those things that it's extremely easy to break. And that's why you see a lot of attacks going after
Is
random
it
number.
I don't know if I would say that.
I mean, not for maybe you and me, right? If there's a tool that they have called like Feather Duster that's used for like cryptanalysis,
not like a
and
house
stuff.
of cards.
Yeah, but I mean, then you could roll into like what was it called? That vulnerability in 2014, 2015. They happened to do it was with like OpenSSL Heartbleed, right?
Right.
Like, hey, now there's a weaponized version of this, and so is that possible? And you take a look at like a lot of I don't need to go down the NSA stuff. We all know what happened, right? But these guys are brilliant, right? They're going to attack the protocol at attacking like your C value in your random number generator.
Yeah,
right?
we're going to have Snowden on the show, by the way. In the next few weeks. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
We're still in the process of setting that up. So
how is that going to work if you block?
Stay tuned.
How's that going to work if you geo-block traffic from Russia?
Matt Damon's going to be on here as well. So just stay tuned.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking real security. This isn't just like, and that's what I enjoy about this
Dude,
podcast,
who better
right?
to talk about security than Jason Bourne? Hello.
I mean, yeah, man. He's public enemy number one from, everybody's country. He keeps people in check, So, okay. So let's talk the privacy so from the privacy perspective, they say the contact trace. So this is what I want to fact check, right? Because this sounds good at the level right here. So contact tracing Bluetooth spec does not use location for proximity detection. It strictly uses Bluetooth beaconing to detect proximity. So that's where that RSSI stuff comes in, right? So you need to make sure that type of data remains separate. A user rolling proximity identifier, that is the one that talked about a privacy preserving identifier. That was the first identifier that talked about a privacy preserving identifier that's rotated every 15 minutes, changes every 15 minutes, and needs the daily tracing key to be correlated to the user. So that's interesting, right? So you need the daily tracing key to correlate to the user, but the daily tracing key, so what we want to look out for, is there any way to pull the daily tracing key? So that's the daily tracing key is derived from the tracing key every 24 hours, right? So that's good information to know. Proximity identifiers obtained from other devices are processed exclusively on the device. That's similar to like how they handle like your health data and stuff like that. Processed on the device, but not shared unless you opt in. So I'm assuming, based on reading this, they're going to allow people to opt in to do some type of government tracking or get data to see who's exposed, who's not exposed, take your daily temperature, that type of stuff. Users decide whether to contribute to contact tracing. Perfect. If diagnosed with COVID-19, users consent to sharing diagnosis keys with servers. So even if you are diagnosed, the user has to consent with sharing. But that also tells me that if you are diagnosed, there's a channel where somebody's diagnosing you and you have to consent to share the data. So if the data has to share on my phone, right?
Right. And we know, we know that past history, I'm totally okay with eavesdropping of my phone conversations and text messages and everything, right? Like I consented to that.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I didn't, but yet the government still got that. Okay. Carry on.
Yeah. And then users have transparency into their participation in contact tracing. And I believe Apple will implement that well. I think they've done a stand-up job over especially the last 3 iPhone revisions in terms of, we've already talked about the different ways that they talk about privacy, how they communicate privacy. Everything that they've done has been in the benefit of users understanding and putting the knowledge in the user's hand to either participate or not participate. And you don't have to read 30 pages worth of stuff. Like if you look at these standards they put out, I'm like, oh God, here's the API documentation. It's going to be hundreds of pages. And like each of these are like 6 pages, right? So they're easy to digest and I recommend everybody read it. So that's the first one. That's on the Bluetooth standard. So the next one gets into the cryptographic spec, and I'm not going to touch on the math stuff here at all and how the keys are derived. But essentially, there's a key schedule. You have a tracing key unique per device, daily tracing key again once per day, and a rolling proximity identifier that's every 15 minutes, right? So here's what I thought was interesting on the daily tracing key, and that is the key that's derived every 24 hours. And that also, if you look at the privacy consideration, it says you need the daily tracing key to be correlated to the user, right? So remember that. So daily tracing key allows you to correlate. Upon a user testing positive, the daily tracing keys for days where the user could have been affected are derived on the device from the tracing key. So why does that happen? So it holds the keys for 14 days before it gets rid of them, right? Because that's the 14-day
because that's the time of the incubation.
Right. And that'll let you know every one of those tracing keys, it's a tracing key. I love the name of it too. Apple even makes it easy to digest because they want to trace who you had access, who you were in proximity to, right?
So, and then what happens then though? Like say you have that information, do they do a push notification to those people?
So once you say you're tested positive, the keys for the days are then analyzed to figure out who's been in proximity. Then what they do is they refer to a subset of the keys called a diagnostic key. And if a user remains healthy and never tests positive, the daily tracing keys never leave the device, which is interesting because it's generally a 14-day window. The use of a 16-byte key allows the limit server device requirements for the transfer and storage. So it doesn't talk about once you test positive, it kind of lets us know that, okay, now we can start pulling your previous daily tracing keys or your tracing keys to understand.
So what's the,
okay. So if it kind of backtrack.
Yeah, it backtracks, but like, what is the point? Like, what is the overall goal? Okay. Yeah, because I'm just like, and I'm not trying to rush you along or anything, but I'm trying to figure out like, this could be a huge benefit.
Yeah.
But if you're not notifying people that came in contact with someone infected, like how does that benefit humanity?
Right. Okay, so privacy considerations here. So that's kind of like matching values from users that tested positive. So once you test positive for the virus, the diagnostic key and associated day numbers are uploaded to the diagnostic server. That's the first time we see data leaving the device, right? Yeah. And the diagnostic key, if we remember, that's the subset of the daily tracing keys, which are uploaded when we test positive. So we already knew that occurred. And then it said, in order to identify any exposures, each client frequently fetches the list of diagnostic keys. Since diagnostic keys are set of daily tracing keys with their associated day numbers, each of the clients are able to derive the sequence of rolling proximity identifiers that were advertised over Bluetooth. So that lets us know, hey, we could identify who is in proximity, essentially. In order to do so, the use of the diagnostic key with the function defined to the derive of the rolling proximity identifier. So for each of these derived identifiers, they must match it against the sequence they have found through the Bluetooth scanning. So there's some type of validation process.
Translate all that for me.
I don't know. I haven't had a chance to break this down yet, but it
That
looks like,
sounds
hey, it's all about identifying users at this point, right? Identifying and notification.
So the cell phone has to, like, say I'm user X. I don't have anything wrong with me. My phone has to retrieve data daily just to kind of compare.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
That sounds like a lot of data.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, there's some insinuation that's going on here.
Well, if you're doing social distancing right, it would only be like 2 numbers.
Hopefully. But again, they say matches must stay local to the device and not be revealed to the diagnostic server. So we're going to get to some.
But in reality, though, like you're saying, like Cash said, that is a lot of data, or at least a lot of record keeping, because you got the device ID, you've got the daily ID, you've got the 15-minute Bluetooth tracking ID. Like, that's a lot of information.
No, I mean, it's a lot of information.
About, like, if I'm like, my phone is just checking to see if any of the people that I came in contact with match any of these positive results information, I have to every day either pull down all of that information from the server and compare.
No, it's already going to have your information. So you're uploading diagnostic information, and you're only uploading diagnostic information if you flag yes. And that's because if you flag yes, then they're going to be able to correlate that diagnostic information with anybody else that you've had contact with, right? But they don't know, they're saying who you had contact with. They don't know where you had contact with them. They know you were within proximity, and they're going to alert you.
But we also know that they know what Wi-Fi's we've connected to. So, and then you can take that and apply that to a map.
It hasn't mentioned Wi-Fi once.
Yeah, but like that, but that's all part of the API on the phone.
Yeah, the beaconing, right? The beaconing does use
like I know that
use an assisted GPS.
Just doing forensics, I can tell you which Wi-Fi things you guys have connected to on your iPhone and your Androids.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that means like, hey, okay, maybe this app specifically won't do it, but maybe there's other applications that you could.
Well, yeah, because like, what's it to stop from borrowing information from the actual phone itself?
Yeah,
like,
in the
like it could get your what's the IMEI number and all that stuff. Like you could totally identify who it is. Like, I guarantee it.
What's interesting about this is all of this relies on a strong tracing key, right? And I just wanted to let me wrap this up here in a second because I don't want to keep on rambling. But that tracing key is what's vital because everything is derived from it. It doesn't specify whether it uses the secure enclave. They just say it's unique per device, and everything else on top of that, is a SHA-256 hash derived from that key. So I haven't had a chance to really look into the math as much, but that part looks pretty sound, but it is a 32-bit. Well, I mean, so what? It's SHA-256, right? And the other privacy concern here is a server's operator implementing this protocol does not learn who users have been in proximity with or user's location unless it's also has the unlikely capability to scan advertisements from users who recently reported diagnostic keys. And we know with beaconing, you can't turn that off on the modern phones anymore, right? So that's the first time I'm seeing something get brought up where it's like, hey, they can't know who the user has been in proximity with or the user's location unless there's the unlikely capability to scan advertisements from users who have recently reported diagnoses, right? So I thought that was interesting. And then it says, without the release of the daily tracing keys, it is not computationally feasible for an attacker to find a collision on a rolling proximity identifier. Okay, everything's SHA-256, we get that. And then when reporting diagnosis keys, the correlation of rolling proximity identifiers by others is limited to 24-hour periods due to the use of daily tracing keys. Okay, that makes sense. Because they're not going to have any other data. The server must not, and they're also saying the server must not retain metadata from clients uploading diagnostic keys after including them into an aggregated list of diagnostic keys. So that tells me that users are transmitting metadata, but now we're relying on operators to have their systems configured appropriately so it does not maintain the metadata.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So how often does
that happen? It's just saying should not. Yeah. It's not saying will not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, that's where I started getting like, okay, well, yeah, it's
just, I hate to be the devil's advocate, but it's just like everything else that we know about in the past. It's like, yeah, we're collecting all this data. We're not trying to collect that other data, but if we get it, sorry.
Yeah.
Like,
so we have a little baseline on how some of this works, the tracing key, the daily tracing key, and how essentially every key is, essentially they were talking about how, the rolling proximity identifier, really that's the core key, right? That rotated every 15 minutes. So I'm like, okay, cool. Let's take a look at the API developer information just to see what we can get. So this API is going to be used, you have to believe, by like people that want to track it. So governments are going to be the first one that want to put something on your phone, like we saw maybe over in China to track it, right? But they're going to do it in terms of getting
who's got two thumbs and isn't surprised. This
right.
guy.
So in the API documentation, they break down what an affected user is, what an exposed user is. And when you're an affected user is positively affected, their daily tracing keys should be shared with other users to alert them to potential exposure. These daily tracing keys are derived using...
I'm going to fix all this. I think if you're infected, you have to register like a sex offender.
Yeah, man, 100%. 100%. And then you get like credit notifications when like a sex offender lives around you. I get those from Experian where it's like, a sex offender moved into your neighborhood. And I
didn't know they did that.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
They do it. And then I was like, yeah, I do like I have the Experian, like the credit reporting, just because they have like a nice UI interface and I like to lock things down, but I'm like, it's New York too. So this guy could be like 4 miles away, which is like, okay, there's 8 million people.
That's like that's a world away in New York.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So then it talks about an exposed user and it says, given a set of positively affected daily tracing keys, the framework allows you to determine whether those daily tracing keys were observed locally by the user, indicating potential exposure. If so, additional information such as date and duration may also be retrieved. So now we know that you could start pulling additional information that should have just been stored locally, right? Mm-hmm. So I thought that was interesting from the developer documentation here. So like anything else, I mean, this stuff needs to get proper vetted, and this isn't the final standard that Apple and them are putting out. But they do have a discussion and a request. Okay, so what is this that I highlight here? The request isn't to
where in this documentation does it say they turn this off?
So I'm sure the way that Apple will push it out is like, it'll be like another settings in your phone. So I think if you look at like the health data, do you have an iPhone or an Android?
iPhone.
Yeah. So on the iPhone itself, if you look at the activity app, is it activity app here? No, I think it's under activity
it's a health
settings.
App stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it gives you the option to share at the bottom of it. So if I do privacy and if I do, I think it's activity or fitness or health. Yeah. Health. At the bottom of health, you could subscribe to research studies. Right? These are companies that need to connect.
What this is already? They've already got it out there?
Well, I'm assuming, I mean, this is great because everything lives on my device. And if I opt in, then they could directly pull from my device, right? Only if I opt in.
Crazy.
So hopefully there's some type of stuff that, and it'll tell you so it says you can review and manage all of the studies you're enrolled in by going to the research app. So it's like, you can get really granular with the information you can give them. But man, I mean, like we see with everything else, every other breach in our discussion last time, hardening the systems and having transparency. Anytime you have something like this, you need to have transparency on it. Hopefully Apple provides more of that, but you need to have independent research that's done. And we do that all the time with clients.
This is America. We don't do transparency.
Yeah. Well, I mean, cryptography, is, the only way you
the
vet it
opposite
out.
of transparency.
Well, I mean, no, but I mean, the standards themselves have to be vetted by academic industry in order to try to break it, in order to make it secure, right? And that's where we come up with these secure standards and stuff like that. So it's like there is a level of vetting that needs to be done. But my concern with all of this, it looks nice, but it's the operators. Where's this information going? Can they truly only get this? Can they install another application on my phone that wants my location data, right? And remember those applications for the longest time where it's like, you couldn't click Uber was like this. You couldn't click while using the app. It's like, hey, it's either all or nothing. So do you want to use Uber or not? Right? So Apple forced them to do like the while using the app thing, right? I don't know what it's like on the Google side of the house. So you see them taking proactive steps to make sure that people are only pulling stuff out. But again, I have to see the type of information you could pull on the final standard and
because
see the type of correlation attack you can do.
Yeah. Well, so there's that. But like, just like you said, they force you to accept things just to use the phone. So like, So it's not enabled in this one. It's not in the terms and use on this one, but in something else that you're forced to use, like iTunes or Google Play, we know that we have to turn the Google Play services on, even though we know that it's tracking us in various ways, right? Like providing maps data, etc.
Google Play is way more lax about it. I mean, you saw those vulnerabilities or that, the malware that was discovered again on their store, on children apps of all things.
I mean, they're lax about the content on the store, but like as far as having that features enabled on your phone for an Android, good luck using your Android phone without Google Play enabled. Google Play services enabled in anyways.
Yeah, Google's still a long way ahead. I know on like their latest version, my Samsung
Remember when
Galaxy
Google's company motto used to be "Don't be evil"?
Yeah.
And what is it now? Give me the money.
So, I don't know. I remember Steve Jobs said it was bullshit. Remember?
Yeah.
They're like, "What do you think about Don't be evil?" He's like, "That's bullshit." I was like, "Oh man."
I mean, I don't know what it is now, but it's not "Don't be evil."
Trust us.
Is that what it is?
I don't know, but it's
right here. Alphabet took "Do the right thing" as its motto.
Oh, good for them. I mean, they've done some great stuff.
Better.
But more specifically, the good stuff I see coming out of Google is really from the Project Zero group. They don't care who they're going after, if it's a Google application or, if it's one of their competitors. Like they're just like, those guys are brilliant with some of the stuff. I mean, they were the ones that did the SHA-1 collision, right?
But at the same time,
these are the same guys that can
disclosures are like they don't even give people time to disclose, do they?
I think they do for the most part.
Okay.
I would,
and then if they don't disclose within a certain amount of time, then they just publish it anyways.
Yeah, I mean, responsible disclosure is a vital thing in this industry, right? And for those that have never heard of that before, it's essentially giving a company, you find something, you don't tell the world about it. You give the company generally 90 days to fix something. But there was a case, I mean, unless
it's not 90 days anymore.
No, unless it's critical to
Project Zero.
Yeah, Project Zero, if it's that critical, they'll just release it, right? Because there needs to be so much attention turned to fixing the problem. That it just needs to get out there, right? And maybe there's a level of difficulty to implement an exploit against it. So maybe you do have some lead time, but it's, I'm sure they're available as resource. I mean, the whole bug bounty type community is all about, hey, how do you fix this? And all that stuff is generally, hey, this is how you fix it, X, Y, and Z.
So that I'm not charged with libel or slander or whatever. It is 90 days for Project Zero.
Is it?
Still is.
Yeah.
I would be surprised
to
remember it not being that, but
no, there was one that came out recently where they said, I forgot which one it was, but they definitely said, hey, because of how critical this is, like we're releasing it now.
That's I thought like that 90 days was very loose.
It is. Anyway. Yeah. Well, at least companies could get, people could get in contact for the most part with some of these companies now. It's like, oh, well,
yeah.
It's like,
so what do you think, Cash? Are you going to enable this? Are you going to have them track you?
I don't know. I'm even thinking like, even if I had it, would I want to share it? It's kind of like stamping a letter on your forehead and say, yo, I got the virus.
Oh, worst case scenario, right?
Scarlet letter, man.
Yeah.
Like,
you're the only guy that, yeah. I mean, I don't know. There has to be something, right? So with this pandemic, it opened eyes to a lot of different issues. One, when it comes to supply chain, we always talk about supply chain security, but has the board been modified since it was made and shipped from China, right? But it's never been like how we handle data centers and our data, where it's like, hey, you need to be geographically dispersed, right? Just in case something does go down, or you want to feed data as close to the edge as possible so that users get access to your website as fast as possible. And the whole, there needs to be something different from there. But there has to be a better way to track this and get a hold of it as well when something like this happens. But I mean, it's such a slippery slope,
It's super slippery. I mean, like, I'm not a crazy privacy person. Like, I know people who have a laptop dedicated to just paying bills online, and that's it. Like, they don't log into any of their utilities or anything except for on that laptop.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that laptop's like running Tails or something crazy.
What if they like
Windows XP?
Well, what I was going to say is like, with that said, like, there's a reason that like you're not allowed to bring a cell phone into a secure facility, right? Because there's already things on your phone that allow people to spy on you. And then now you're putting this on there, and you're connecting your phone to all these other people. And I mean, there's ways to figure out who you're talking to, obviously via phone records and triangulation and all that stuff. But I mean, Just now you're tracking who the strangers are that I come in contact with at the store.
Well, and the stuff is super low power too. So you think about like Wi-Fi and stuff like that. But even on my like Ubiquiti gear here, let me show you. Like this
But
thing
can
is
you imagine, like you take location data, you take this tracking data,
100%.
you could essentially you could use big data to hone in on one person and track their entire day of everywhere and everything they were doing with 15-minute beacons.
100%.
Right? Because it's doing 15-minute increments. So, or whatever it is.
And things still receive your beacon info. You know, I remember like when I picked up like a pineapple and doing the Wi-Fi stuff, it's like, holy crap. So like they've gotten better with some of that stuff, you know, and the data that goes out, but it's still like, you know, that the big risk is like, I'm looking for a home network. I'm looking for a home network. Oh, I'm on the subway. I'm home network. Oh, let's join it automatically. Cause that's the nature of the device. Cause people don't want to type in the password every time. Right. So that's like a balance that has to be struck. But the most annoying thing too, and it still does this on Apple. I'm walking around. I'm like, what freaking Wi-Fi am I connected to? And it's like AT&T this. And it wasn't until this version of iOS that you could go in there and be like, absolutely do not auto join this. Right.
Yeah.
But that's something that is not off by default, and it should be off by default. It should be a feature you can enable. Like, hey, do you want to join, you know, this wireless network from AT&T because you have AT&T or Verizon? And I should just be able to say no. I should never see my phone automatically connect to something, you know, unless there's some type of trust. But even if there's no signal, that beacon data is still received. So I'm looking at like neighboring access points on my unified network, and there's stuff that must be like, I run 802.11ac at home only. So it's pretty short range, you know, 3 access points, pretty close range. But it's picking up hotels that are like far down the street at a bridge, and it's picking up like their SSID. Even though the signal strength and stuff like that is 0, it's still able to pick up some of this beaconing data, right? So you have to think, it's not just like, hey, within 5 feet around you, it is quite a distance that this stuff can be picked up on, you know?
I mean, you play with a Cantenna, you can definitely see.
Yeah, you get a Yagi or something like that.
Anymore.
The Yagis or something. Yeah, the Cantennas. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Those are the best.
My first DEF CON was amazing when I got to play with a Cantenna.
You probably can't talk about some of this stuff.
You know, I just
in a Faraday cage. Yeah.
I'm going to throw something completely not a twist, but just a thought that I had. Instead of them tracking to see who has the virus and alerting everybody, what if they did something like, you know how they track your screen time? They say, hey, you've been on your screen for 5 hours average. What if they did something to, you know, protect privacy, you know, healthcare related info, and just say, hey, this person, you know, to practice social distancing, you shouldn't really come in contact with more than X number of people, right? So why don't they just do something like that to say, hey, if you've come in contact with more than 10 people, we're going to alert, you know, or put some kind of system in place to say, okay, you can't enter this building because according to your data on your phone, you've been in contact with 50 people. You're not social distancing.
Oh, that's 1984 right there.
You're taking Gestapo to a new level. Yeah. There. It's like, hey, the neighbors telling on neighbors, but instead of your neighbors, it's your phone, you know, telling on you.
I mean, but the other way around too, like what Cash was saying too, is like the screen time. What if you have a phone that was using, I don't know, say 5 hours of screen time one day, and they haven't come in contact with anybody for a few days, and their screen time is down, but the phone's still, you know, charging and working. Do you do a wellness check, right? Because now what we're seeing in the news is like people with COVID-19 who have passed away in their homes, or like, I don't know if it was here. So I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if it was here in Oregon or Washington, but I thought it's somewhere. They found 15 people that had died that were unaccounted for because no one had reported it, and they were all in a senior living home or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
So what if you take that data? You could totally like, okay, 4 days, they haven't come in contact with anybody. They're not doing any screen time.
Yeah.
We know they haven't moved. Maybe we should send over.
Do you want to opt in and notify people?
Like crazy shit. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No,
there's so much crazy beep you can do.
Beep. Yeah, there is. I mean, if you look at this stuff, like this core technology, the Bluetooth advertising stuff, the BTLE, I was just like, hey, I know Meraki had this feature. I was just searching around. The first thing that pops up is, hi, I just discovered Bluetooth advertising, which is probably great for our business. He's like, the idea is we are creating a campaign and push it through notification of users' phones that have enabled Bluetooth. We tried Splash Access, but it needs an application to download it for the push notification to work. How do we do this without the application. So Cisco's like, you have to have the application, right? They said you could, but that's generally like, especially from like a marketing standpoint, that's generally their, I remember like one of my first not at Tavora, but like where I was at before, they took a course called flexible ethics, right? And that's totally what that type of mindset comes out of, right? So Apple could design something like this to be good. It could be adapted then to pretty much anything else.
You took a course called flexible ethics?
I didn't take it. Our marketing team took a flexible, it was literally called flexible ethics.
I want to have a podcast dedicated to that topic alone.
Ethics.
Yeah. I have some
like,
sounds fun though.
They teach you to not have a moral compass?
No. You have a moral compass, but maybe it just points northeast. It's flexible, right? It doesn't just point one direction, but it gives you
wherever
like
the dollar sign is.
Yeah, as long as you're between north and east, you're okay, right? It's just, you haven't violated ethical obligations. You just really push the boundaries because it hasn't been specified legally, So I could give some like use case examples on that, right? So you can have a situation where maybe you are running a service that has advertisements.
So many
right?
things
and
are running through my head right now, and I'm just biting my tongue.
So this is
I can't talk about this right now.
No. I mean, this is nothing. This is a long time ago. This is nothing with us. But
yeah,
this is
nothing
like,
new, right?
Yeah,
we see it every day.
This is nothing new, right? Yeah, totally. But I mean, so it's like, hey, you're selling a service, and the premium version of the service, you don't get an advertisement, right? But when we don't show an advertisement, our advertisers, they're not paying us anymore. So that really sucks. But what if we just have a button that hides the advertisement, but it still gets loaded, right? That's an example of like the flexible ethics kind of like thought process, right? Where it's like, hey, we're still getting rid of ads, but they're just hidden by default, but they're still there.
Like my favorite is like, you're listening to the radio and they're like, yeah, thanks for listening to KP45, whatever channel you're listening to. We're the ad-free station. We're never away from music for more than 2 minutes, or whatever. And you're like, you just gave me an ad. Like, I get it. That's your radio call sign or whatever you want to call it. But like, you just gave me an ad. Like, I didn't. That's a plug. I wasn't listening. Well, yeah, it's a plug, but still, like, I wasn't listening to music nonstop.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the term for ad-free, the term for privacy, what constitutes as privacy? I mean, they're vague, and really it's right now. I think the public is demanding something being done, and all the governments, they're struggling to respond. They're not struggling to fix. So you see Apple and Google at least trying to take the first step.
I don't even know which one's up anymore. I feel like there's no laws non-existent anymore. Companies break it left and right. Politicians break it left and right. I mean, what does it really matter? I'm just going to stay here. You know what I need to do? I need to just buy a bunker, and then that's where I'm just going to live.
Well, I mean, it shouldn't be a breakdown of how we.
Like, you do you. I'm going to do me.
Yeah. I mean, it shouldn't be a breakdown of how we do things, right? We should still be going to like our representatives.
I wish our country's motto was do the right thing. Like, just because it's not illegal doesn't mean it's right.
Hey, you said you didn't want to go down this path.
Just because you can't go to jail for it does not make it okay.
Okay, so
cutting in front of me in line at the grocery store, it's not okay.
Can I play this? Can I play this one? Okay, since you're going down this path, can I play this like 1 2-minute clip really quick?
Yeah.
So this 2-minute clip is done by my old representative. His name is Congressman Ted Lieu. This guy's amazing.
Your old representative. So you're saying you're from LA? Got it.
I lived in LA.
I know so much about you now.
Yeah, correlation attack. So here's him. This is like a committee oversight thing when they're trying to backdoor encryption for the 50th time, right? But it talks about privacy and why there's an inherent, I think, distrust.
Ooh, real quick before we start, you have YouTube Premium. What's that like?
Oh, no commercials, man. It is the best.
Oh, I might have to do that. Okay, go ahead.
I initially didn't do it, but I mean,
hey, YouTube, if you want to sponsor this would be a good time.
Does it say control? Okay, so the screen. Okay, where does it show share audio? Because last time it did that, and you're sharing computer audio. Perfect. Okay, cool. So if you guys say something, it's going to echo probably. So here it is.
Your public service, I take great offense at your testimony today. You mentioned that unaccountable corporate interests such as Apple and Google are essentially protecting those who rape, defraud, assault, and kill. I think that's offensive. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the problem. Why do you think Apple and Google are doing this? It's because the public is demanding it. People like me, privacy advocates, a public that doesn't want an out-of-control surveillance state. It is a public that is asking for this. Apple and Google didn't do this because they thought they'd make less money. This is a private sector response to government overreach. Then you make another statement that somehow these technology companies are not credible because they also collect private data. Well, here's the difference. Apple and Google don't have coercive power. District attorneys do, the FBI does, the NSA does. And to me, it's very simple to draw out the privacy balance when it comes to law enforcement and privacy. Just follow the damn Constitution. And because the NSA didn't do that, and other law enforcement agencies didn't do that, you are seeing a vast public reaction to this. Because the NSA, your colleagues, have essentially violated Fourth Amendment rights of every American citizen for years by seizing all of our phone records, by collecting our internet traffic. That now is spilling over to other aspects of law enforcement. And if you want to get this fixed, I suggest you write to NSA, and the FBI should tell the NSA, stop violating our rights. And then maybe you'd have the public much more on the side of supporting some of what law enforcement is asking for.
That's it. But I mean, I think it
Preach it, brother.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think I think some of those concepts ring true to like the questions that the discussions we're having right now, right?
Cash doesn't believe in that. Cash is okay with a overreaching government. He likes being surveilled.
Just tell me something bad's going to
Just kidding.
Yeah.
I do everything incognito. It's cool.
Just his browsing habits.
Well, I mean, the issue with Cognito is none of your plugins work, right? So all of your ad blocking, privacy badger stuff is like turned off. So it's like, okay, cool. Like no script is no longer running. So,
yep.
But yeah, but nothing gets saved. So that's great, right? It's just your device is compromised at this point.
In theory.
I mean, I guess, but then I lose like my search video history. I mean,
everything's a balance, right? Yeah, everything's a balance. But yeah. Anyways, again, you know, our 30-minute podcast has turned into over an hour.
That's okay.
Oh, good.
We're trying to compete
Let's
with
make
our
it
other
fun.
competitors in the space that do 2-hour-long security podcasts, which I don't know what you'd talk about, but
They rant, man.
yeah, I like security.
Well, I mean, they're also
I don't know
having
that I could
they're also
entertain
having
people for I don't know that I entertain people for 30 minutes, let alone 2 hours.
I mean, you know, they're smoking cigars, having drinks, so it takes a little bit longer to get,
Yeah.
you know, some of the
We
concepts
should-
out.
we
But
can
This
start
podcast is sponsored by Winmere Brothers Heffenweisen right now. So
I thought you
Thanks,
said that
Winmere
we were
Brothers.
going to get who's the company you said that was going to sponsor us last time that we were talking about? You're like, oh, they don't
I
sponsor
don't know. We
us
have a
yet.
lot of sponsors. You
We
have
have a
to
lot
narrow it
of-
down.
They're
have a-
lining. We reject them though because you know we're very picky.
No,
Yeah.
I'll take money. If Matt and I'll split it then. Matt, what if I put you on to plug your email address or something? Like, let them know where to send the money. We'll do some shadow sponsorship.
Podcast
Bitcoin
at
account.
tavoratalks.com.
Oh, I thought you were going to do your personal domain. You know, just keep it off the books.
Oh, we're not publicly traded. It could be hidden behind the doors. Nobody needs to know.
Just you and I are supposed to have the money. Nobody else. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Here's my Bitcoin address.
There you go. Oh, I did a good talk. I actually did a lecture at George Mason University this week, and I talked about the globalization of cybercrime, and we kind of went in depth on like what enabled cybercrime to be kind of transnational. And I talked about like Bitcoin and Tor and all that good stuff. And you know, not that like cybercrime needed those things to be transnational, but it definitely helped keep people anonymous, as well as the money to get paid for ransoms and whatever else that they do. So it was cool. We had a good time.
That is fun. Did you do that in person or did you guys practice social distancing?
We did practice social distancing. Plus, George Mason University is like in Virginia. So
I just got a letter or market. They sent it over to me. I don't even know how I got put onto the thread, but they're like, hey, do you want to come to this security meetup on the 23rd of April and talk cloud security? And I was like,
No.
what?
yeah, I'll be there.
Like, yeah, man, I'm coming. Get the hotel, get the first class ticket ready. You know, make sure like I got a private jet so I don't interact with anybody.
I mean, I think now if you fly anywhere, it's a private jet.
do we get a private jet? yet?
Complete with crew.
It's like you actually have to fly it yourself. So good luck. And
I mean, I've played Grand Theft Auto. I could fly a plane.
yeah, man, I could fly a simulator. Let's do this. Let's do this.
But yeah, it was good. So I was telling Cash that, you know, it'd be fun to do more podcasts like that, like on topics like that, and even talk about like the history of cybersecurity. Like, so during that lecture, I talked about Anonymous, like in the early days, and then the HB Gary federal hack and how they broke off into LulzSec and anti-sec. And then, you know, and then you had groups like the Lazarus Group and
Yeah.
Carbonac and Fin7. And I was thinking like, man, it'd be fun to like, I could seriously dedicate 30 minutes to each one of those. And then also like just talking about some cool cyber crimes that have happened. Like I was telling Cash, I think it was in the 90s, there was a phone phreaker who like coordinated, I can't remember his name, I'd have to look it up, but he coordinated an attack on K-Rock so that he could win a Porsche, I think. So basically he made himself the 25th caller or whatever.
Yeah, that was common. I remember I used to listen to like the 2600 podcast Off the Hook, and I think it was like 99, 2000. There's like one guy that kept on calling in, and they're like, "Hey, how do you do this?" Because like we get a bunch of callers, and he was like talking about like some software or something he was using. So it's like, hey, based on like when things start, it knows when to start dialing that number, so then you could be that like, you know, that 25th user or something.
Interesting.
So that is interesting. Oh man, that brings me back. Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun to have those kind of conversations. I miss that stuff. Oh my God, LulzSec brings back memories, man. Like, do you remember? Did you
Those
ever
were
see
the heydays, man?
You ever see like their website? There was like a audio clip they released when I think it was like they hacked somebody's like FBI systems or something, and it kind of gave you insight into like processes, right? And it was interesting.
Stratfor?
Yeah, because it was like, hey,
I think it was anti-sec, but they were members of LulzSec. Yeah.
Yeah, they were like, there are 3 users on the call. He's like, there's 2 of us. And it's like, there are 3 users. He's like, well, we should start. We'll get the administrator. And the administrator's like, yeah, we see the person, but we can't kick them. They're like, okay, well, let's continue with the convo. It must be a glitch. And I was like, what?
That's crazy.
I'm like, okay, maybe it's like a new line or something, or, you know, maybe not have the call, or maybe go down to the, I don't know. It was wild.
But yeah, if you're interested, those are going to be coming up. So we can definitely include you on any of those, or if there's any topics that you want to talk about, by all means. So
yeah, man.
They'll probably be on that show with Matt Damon. So
Matt Damon and Edward Snowden, right?
Yes, that's right. I forgot Snowden was going to be on here. He's kind of not as important as Matt Damon, so I kind of forgot. But
no, he's. I would say Snowden is very important. But yeah.
And then we have a whole, sponsorship with Red Bull. No, Rockstar.
Oh no!
All the above.
I mean, Rockstar.
So that's all coming in the future too. So
yeah,
stay tuned.
We couldn't get Club Mate.
Oh yeah, we'll get Club Mate.
We were talking about that the other day.
Club For Mate. Sure.
This podcast sponsored by.
I mean, they essentially sponsor we sponsor them, I guess, for our threat team. So
yeah, you guys do, right? Because you guys buy more, like pretty much like their supply, right?
I got a challenge coin for doing something with Club Mate on the back. So we do something with them. I know that.
Club Mate. Hack hard.
Anyway,
something. I don't know.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Appreciate it. Chris, Cash.
Am I like a frequent visitor now?
Yeah, I think you should be. These topics are pretty fun.
I'm like the mailman and Mr. Rogers. Got it. Perfect. I'm ready.
You bring the mail, you bring the news.
You're Daniel Tiger.
Yeah, but interesting topic. Apple, Google, let's see what you guys can cook up. Maybe the world will either fall apart or you will make it a better
Maybe
place.
Not rape our privacy.
Yeah.
Thanks, Apple.
Hey, and if you guys want to like have an organization put out some assurance and review some of the security controls in place and be able to articulate some of that in a white paper, definitely happy to do that type of thing. So feel free to reach out to us.
There you go.
My name's C. Callis, CCALLAS at Tavora.com. So it's just like John Callis, but it's with a C as in Charlie.
No relation.
It's possible, Greeks are a large community. So I appreciate all the parties he's got me into.
It's not Greeks, a very big island.
No, but there was a lot of them that came over to America.
A lot of procreation though, huh? Yeah. A lot of Catholicism.
No, they're Greek Orthodox.
But Greek Orthodox.
Yeah, but it is.
Stupid. Why did I say Catholic?
they just recently, put up like aside, I guess, some stuff that happened in the 1500s, and they're trying to work together. But it is a lot like Catholicism for sure.
It's a little too soon, don't you think? I mean, can we just,
like you need a good 1,000 years before you could really move on and cleanse everything out. 500 just feels like a little too soon. It's like let's tackle this privacy stuff first, and then we could revisit some of these concepts.
Right.
Yeah, noted down. We'll come back to a whole topic of religion and where that's gonna go.
Oh yeah, this is gonna make this podcast do really well.
Religion,
I mean,
information security,
abortion, religion.
It's just politics,
gun laws.
Yeah.
We'll cover it all. Stay tuned.
But stay tuned. Thanks everybody for listening in. Chris, again, thanks for joining us today. Matt, it's been real as always. And
sorry. I'm just going to say sorry for everything. Every time I wrap up, I'm just
sorry for this, how this turned out.
And, as always, any comments, suggestions, rude remarks, as Matt loves to say, send them to podcast@tavoratalks.com. And until then, enjoy your week, and we'll keep you up to date on the latest trends in cybersecurity. Tavora out.